Welcome to the Ontology of Consciousness. This material is extracted from Scientific Vedanta. I'm David Hughes of emystics.org. Here's a summary of the material that we will cover in this presentation, which takes approximately 30 minutes to complete. Consciousness theory is vital for science, especially modern science like relativity, quantum mechanics, and so forth. Without consciousness, these fields do not make much sense. However, consciousness is widely misunderstood to be a thing in itself instead of a quality or attribute of the living entity. Ontology is the key to a workable theory of consciousness. If our ontology does not provide a correct view of consciousness, then any theory that we base on it will not pan out in experimental work. Ontology is also the key to improving the quality of our consciousness. By changing our ontology, we can change our consciousness. This will also change the universe that we perceive. Vedanta is the original source of a complete ontology of consciousness. The ancient writings of the Vedas, Vedanta Sutra, and so forth, give a complete ontology that expresses all the qualities and possibilities of consciousness, some of which far beyond anything in Western history, religion, or science. Vedanta also provides a scientific method for changing or improving our consciousness, bhakti yoga. And while we won't cover this in this talk, we should know that such methods exist. Now let's talk about consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental to human experience. In fact, as we are fond of pointing out, without consciousness, there are no other issues. Consciousness is required by theories like quantum mechanics and other modern scientific concepts. In fact, quantum mechanics says that the state of consciousness with which we approach an experiment will determine the outcome. However, quantum mechanics treats consciousness as a black box without any internal structure or ontological support. This leads to the fact that there is no adequate predictive theory of consciousness in Western science. As a result, fields like consciousness studies are stalled on insubstantial issues like, is consciousness an epiphenomenon of the mind or the brain? This does not give us any idea of the nature or possibilities of consciousness. Some of the reasons why consciousness theory in the West is in such a state of confusion are our cultural and linguistic bias makes us treat consciousness as a thing rather than a process or a quality of the living entity. These attitudes are built into our language and into our cultural institutions and make it very difficult to overcome these misconceptions. Another is the assumptions of Aristotelian logic that underlie all Western culture, thought, and philosophy. These are traceable back to Aristotle, 3,500 years ago, who said that the only possible values of truth are either true or false. And as we know from our experience in life, things are a little bit more complex than that. Aristotelian logic does work, but only in a world which is constructed on Platonic idealist metaphysics. The actual world is constructed on something much different. However, Platonism has been a useful context for the construction of mechanistic sciences up until now. Some of the baggage that comes along with Aristotelianism and Platonic idealism are identification. In other words, A equals A. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. But as we know, our experience in real life shows us that no two things are exactly identical, even if they have the same name. This kind of thinking is a function of identification. Another trait of Aristotelian thought is elementalism, that if we can name something, it can be isolated and treated as a separate object. However, consciousness does not really respond well to that treatment, and our treating consciousness as an object leads to an improper ontological analysis of consciousness and strongly delimits our possibilities of working with consciousness in an effective manner. Our ontology really is the key to what we're able to accomplish in our work with consciousness. But what exactly is an ontology? Well, that depends on who you ask. In classical writings, ontology is usually the domain of religion, an account of all possible domains and categories of existence given by theologies. In philosophy, ontological writings usually make a difference between categories and substances. In other words, there are many different substances in the world, and they have different sets of qualities which can be classified according to certain structures, and that's our ontology of everything that exists. More recently, in religion, an ontology has come to mean a collection of stories, legends, myths, historical accounts, and so forth, that present a certain worldview characteristic of that religion. And in science, ontology has come to mean a formal, often mathematical model of a subject or space of possibilities. A good example would be the language of mathematics, which is now used to describe all kinds of things, whether they can exist or not, as possibilities of existence. The more recent developments in the field of ontology apply the ontology to artificial intelligence and are actually involved right now in enhancing the World Wide Web to support automated reasoning and knowledge processing as opposed to information processing. However, all the conceptions of ontology that we've discussed so far are about words. Ontology is not just a word. It's a real thing, an object. A word is always different from the object or experience that it represents, and the same is true of ontology. An ontology is not beliefs or a belief system. Rather, an ontology is the structural assumptions with which we approach experience or reality. These are far more than just beliefs that can be changed or altered consciously or deliberately. They are semantic reactions which are actually programmed into our nervous system, and they're an expression of our metaphysical interpretation or model of reality. This is a far more deep and complex subject than simply a belief system, a religion, a scientific philosophy, or something like that. It's an actual model of reality that we create and maintain within our mind and nervous system, and which gives meaning to our experience. I'm not going to say too much more about the nature and structure of an ontology. It's a very deep subject, and we could go into the semantic principles underlying it and so forth. We don't have space in this very short presentation. The structure of an ontology is a triplicate structure. For example, in a sentence, we have a subject, a predicate, and an object. Somebody is doing something to something else. This triplicate structure is fundamental to the nature of reality, which, as we've said before, is based on consciousness. Without consciousness, there would be no reality to speak of. Our senses give us a perception of the form of our surroundings and our experience. This is another triplicate structure that is basic, fundamental to experience. Another triple is the being has consciousness, and that consciousness gives perception of qualities of experience and reality. Another way to say this is that we always find differentiation between the subject and the object of consciousness. This relation or relationship allows us to apply a description to those objects and orient ourselves in the world and reality. This triple or tripartite structure of ontological objects is a hallmark of ontological writings going all the way back to the Vedas and Vedanta. It reflects the actual nature of human experience, which is based on consciousness. Any ontology which does not reflect the triple or tripartite ontological structure of reality is not going to result in being able to predict transformations in consciousness, which are fundamental to our experience. Therefore, in summation, ontology is a kind of language for building language models of reality and experience. The latest expressions in this field are RDF and OWL web ontology languages, which are being used for description of the contents of web pages to allow more intelligent search and knowledge processing functions. These languages, for the first time, enable us to express formally in mathematical terms, the content of an ontology or description of reality, at least certain aspects of reality. Although these files can be very large and complex, involving many, many megabytes of data or more, even terabytes of data, still they enable us to do things that we've never been able to do before with computers. This is very exciting and forms the foundation of our work at eMystics. Now that we have some idea what an ontology is, let's look at the relationship between ontology and consciousness. This is a very closely coupled relationship in that the ontology that we subscribe or commit to gives us the categories that we use to interpret reality, the substance of our experience. Our ontology also determines the level of our consciousness and how expansive our view of reality is. By the anthropic principle, which I'm not going to discuss here, but you can read about it on the web,